All right, thanks, Yasmin, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this call today. I am really excited about this panel discussion and look forward to talking through some of the connections between climate justice and adaptation and mitigation and population from human rights perspectives. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by Lara of Women for Conservation in Colombia. She's going to be discussing a lot of her really impactful work in the spaces of population health and the environment and climate adaptation throughout some at-risk communities in Colombia and evidently elsewhere. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. I'm going to start out just by introducing Sara, giving a short bio. We also were supposed to have Dr. Joan Castro from PATH Philippines. She might be joining us. It's really early there, so she might not be. But in the case that she does, I'll just go ahead and introduce her as well, and then I'll facilitate discussion afterwards. So after I introduce Sara, I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the major concepts that population connection uses in order to talk through and argue in favor of climate adaptation through slowing population growth and climate and planetary health. After which point, I'm going to open it up to Sara for her presentation on Women for Conservation. And then we're going to be facilitating the Q&A. So as Yasmin mentioned, if you do have any questions or discussion points throughout the presentation, please voice them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as the presentations are over. All right, so Lara is here with us today, and she is a passionate conservationist, feminist, and environmental activist of indigenous ancestry. She was actually born in the Andean mountains of Cauca, Colombia. She originally obtained a degree in civil engineering and has worked on major infrastructure projects such as the UK Channel Tunnel rail link. Her career change to conservation was a response to her analysis of the world's need for positive change and gender equality. Sara is a multidisciplinary individual with a keen interest in innovative solutions to dynamic problems. She has 2 decades of conservationist experience throughout Latin America, working closely with international organizations, communities, and governments. In 2004, Sara combined her love of nature with her drive to empower women and established an organization called Women for Conservation, of which she is currently president. She is also the founding member and executive director of Fundación Pro Aves. And I think, Rebecca, are you gonna go ahead and share the screen whenever you can for the presentation?
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely.
I would like to share the screen, a presentation that I can put together for you, and I hope you...
Yeah, Sara, I'm just going to do a quick intro before you do that. We're just waiting for... Yeah, no problem. We're just going to wait for Sara or Rebecca to share her screen. Perfect. And you can actually just go ahead right to the next slide on PHE. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So again, I'm just going to kind of briefly introduce the concepts of PHE and climate adaptation as they apply to population connections work in particular, which is more of a global analysis and focus. And as an organization, we work at the intersections of global population dynamics, access to comprehensive reproductive health care and education, and environmental sustainability. And in terms of climate change, we work to provide education and outreach about the different ways in which humans impact and are impacted by a progressively warmer planet for which we are all responsible. We also employ what's called a PHE, or a population health and environment framework, which recognizes the interconnected nature of development, public health, and conservation, and also recognizes in particular that issues of poverty, marginalization, and inequality really impact the ways in which humans interact with their environments. And so from a PHE perspective, we can see that, for example, of course, population pressures result in environmental damage, but also that, population pressures are in effect a measure of inequality. In contrast, access to resources like healthcare, education, economic opportunity, fresh water, and sanitation works to alleviate poverty while empowering women and girls and helping the environment. At its foundation, the concept of PHE really emphasizes, again, the interdependent nature of sustainability, human rights, and planetary health, and also makes clear the fact that human health depends on the health of Earth's ecosystems. Next slide, please. And we can apply the same principles and understandings to understand climate change on a deeper level. And we do this with the intention of finding ways to create solutions that are integrated, culturally relevant, and widely effective. Climate change is, of course, a global force, but it also is something that highlights the world's existing inequalities while at the same time creating new ones. And partly because of this, the climate crisis has really clarified the connections between various forms of structural violence and oppression, including violence against women and environmental damage, meaning that the very same social and economic systems that encourage the exploitation of the Earth's natural systems and resources and the degradation of ecosystems more broadly also results in the subjugation and exploitation of women, as well as pretty much every other marginalized group on Earth, including, by the way, plants and non-human animals. Next slide, please. Globally, the regions with the highest fertility rates are also among the most vulnerable to climate change. And this makes sense when we understand that there's a direct correlation between high fertility and poverty, and also that gender inequality is a major cause and effect of poverty. And so one of the major links between women and girls and climate change is that climate impacts hit these populations the hardest. Next slide, please. Women and girls face greater risk of displacement and are more likely to be injured or killed by natural disasters. Climate impacts like prolonged drought and unpredictable rainy seasons have already proven to increase the incidence of child marriage and the likelihood that women and girls will be pushed into prostitution. Girls are more likely to leave school prematurely in response to climate-induced natural disasters and the many ancillary social and economic issues that coincide with the warming planet. And unfortunately, the list goes on and on here in terms of the discrepancies. Next slide, please. But amidst these tragedies is also a lot of real hope and opportunity. Working to secure the rights of women and girls helps expand human rights, but it also, helps really increase climate resilience. And in terms of mitigation, it's really a compelling strategy in terms of averting the worst of the potential trajectories of climate change. And this is true in many different ways. For example, in terms of agriculture, because women farmers actually produce a huge amount of the world's food. In fact, women produce 60 to 80% of food in lower income countries. Typically, these women are what are called smallholders, which means that they work on small parcels of land. But because of gender inequality, they have less access to resources like that of capital or credits or technology or training in comparison to men, and thus end up producing less food on the same amount of land. Research from Project Drawdown shows that if these gaps are closed, farm yields would rise by 30%, meaning that 30% more food could be produced in the same amount of land. And this directly intersects with climate change, because one of the biggest challenges we face as a growing population is the ability to produce enough food. And the fact also that large-scale deforestation occurs as a result of food production, which among other things, of course, increases emissions and worsens climate change. And so by addressing the inequity in agriculture, that would result in higher yields, more food, less deforestation, less emissions, and healthier forests. Drawdown estimates that this could prevent 2 billion tons of emissions between now and 2050. And it also works in the opposite way as well. So for the billions of people that are currently living in rural areas, climate change has, of course, directly influenced the ability to grow food at subsistence levels and to maintain sustainable livelihoods. So gender equity can also facilitate adaptation in these situations as well. Next slide, please. Another way forward is that of education, especially for women and girls. So right now it's estimated that there are about 130 million girls worldwide that are denied the basic human right to attend school. Education is, of course, a vital aspect of development and ultimately results in better health outcomes, better financial stability, more agency and autonomy, and more ability to adapt to climate change. Women who are educated tend also to have fewer, healthier children. And this is true for a variety of reasons, but typically because education affords more opportunities in life and therefore results in women marrying later and having smaller families overall. Next slide, please. And you can see this playing out. This graph depicts women's educational attainment versus number of children per woman. And as you can see, there's a direct correlation. Also notable is the association of socioeconomic status, which also plays into this whole conversation. Next slide, please. And coupled with education is that of voluntary family planning, which also yields myriad benefits to society and to the environment. Access to quality, comprehensive reproductive health care facilitates, among many other things, what's called informed choice, or the ability to decide when, whether, and with whom to become pregnant, which is an internationally recognized human right, and something I think we can all argue in favor of. However, limited or no access to family planning contraceptives is an issue that results in super high numbers of unintended pregnancies all across the world, including in the United States, where 45% of pregnancies are currently unintended. Next slide, please. And in the world's low-income regions, around 218 million women who want to avoid pregnancy are not currently using modern forms of contraception. Meeting this unmet need is essential for meeting human rights standards and facilitating sustainable development, especially in the wake of mounting climate impacts. Family planning and education, of course, increases adaptation and resilience building, but also can act as a mitigating factor. So by 2050, meeting the unmet need for education and family planning worldwide would result in slower population growth and thus fewer emissions, to the tune of averting around 82 gigatons of CO2 over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. And before I turn it over to Sara, who's going to provide a lot of amazing examples of these concepts playing out at the community level and through grassroots activism, I just want to conclude by saying that I think that the intersections between population and climate change are really interesting and multifaceted. And at least as I have kind of conceptualized things over time working for this organization, I think that one of the main purposes of these intersections is to recognize and see that these sort of these inequalities and these intersections between population and climate change are really calling on us to look at things from a different perspective. One that recognizes the interconnectedness and interdependence of all things and the inequality embedded within the global political, economic, and environmental systems we've created for ourselves and in which we all live. And for me, this signals, of course, the fact that the climate crisis and climate change is a really complicated concept. Things are not always linear or straightforward. But also there's real opportunity and beauty in that because it shows very clearly that solving climate change is predicated on the realization of social justice and human rights all around the world. And with that, I would like to open it up to Sara.
Thank you. Well, it's an incredible presentation. Thank you, Hannah. I think it's just perfect for now what I'm going to be talking to you all and bringing all that very good information and bringing a macro perspective. Now taking it right down to where things happen in the field with the women at the front line of conservation. And so this is Women for Conservation, the organization that I formed, and I'm very proud to share what we've been doing in the last 2 years since we became a nonprofit organization. But before that, we 17 years of working in the field, especially in Colombia, where I was born. So next, please. Who we are is Women for Conservation, how we envision this organization was with the purpose and the mission of empower and partner with women around the globe to protect endangered wildlife and their habitats. So we all know what is happening, the world is facing right now with climate change, with so many disasters all over the place, and still people who deny climate change. But I think when disasters touch your home, it's very difficult to continue live in denial. So this is what it drives us, is to imagine a world where we can all interact in harmony and species can thrive with nature, and women are highlighted in the role of and so much power that they really have and how they can contribute to the solution. So this is what we are intending, to reach out to the women who are in rural areas and ignite that knowledge and that passion that immediately happens when they get to know about the things they can do. Next one, please. Our team, I found it, as I mentioned, is very recent, and I have next to me is Isabella, my daughter, who I'm very proud to be working every day with. She is a trooper. She is in Colombia dealing with all the projects, and as you might know, Colombia is a very important country for conservation, but also it has its own challenges. And we have our Emily Lutzen, which is the communication and outreach, and with the three of us, we are doing all this work, but obviously with very important partners in the field who get the work done. And next one, please. So the origins of why Colombia, well, I was born in Colombia, as I mentioned, and it's a country with extraordinary biodiversity. It's a number one country for birds, and biodiversity is incredible because the location is strategically located in the north between Venezuela and Ecuador, and it has three mountain ranges that brings huge amount of biodiversity and endemism. So next one, please. When along the work that I've been doing for 17 years, I noticed that women were not involved in conservation projects as much as I thought it would. And that really opened my eyes to create opportunities within the projects that I've been working in Colombia to target this group. And it took a long time, I'll say, to get to the point where we are now. 17 years ago, it was hard to talk about the issues as women empowerment and bringing them to the table. There is a biodiversity of cultures, there are indigenous groups, there are other groups that live in rural area, and we have to be very respectful of those cultures. But at the end, we all now agree that women and children are the ones who suffer disproportionately when catastrophes happen related to weather or related to social instability, but women really suffer the most, and indigenous women in rural communities are obviously among them. So bearing this in mind, how women have suffered from different aspects, and this is without even touching on what happens behind closed doors when they are subjected to abuse and mistreated. So all of that, it really encouraged me to create and design projects. Next one, please. Where the levels of endemism are really high, but at the same time, we have communities that are thirsty for knowledge. And in this map, you can see the projects that we currently have, 10 projects in total. And each of the projects is working with a specific species of birds or mammals that are under threat. And these sites are called ACE sites, which is a site, it's called for Alliance for Zero Extinction. And these sites are the most important sites on Earth to protect any critical endangered species. And around of these nature reserves is where all our projects are located with the community. Next one, please. And also we had expanded our work in Nepal. We are very proud to also be now supporting this incredible work that Birds Nepal is doing. This is a small organization that also embrace the concept of our work, and they're thriving. And now we help to set up a nature reserve also in this area. And when now you can see the tigers and rhinos and nature is coming back to this protected area, and working with the communities around, especially women and kids, bringing education to them is being a game changer. Next, please. So finding the solutions, as Hannah was mentioning before, there are huge challenges, but what we've been seeing is if we come to find solutions that benefit people, biodiversity, and women, and we take those small pilot projects that we develop with the community, I think this is the key to get more and more people at the local level involved and understanding. So our success relies in the fact that we empower the local women who are in the communities, and they go fly with the projects, they make it their own. And this has been the key to have so many successes in a short time. Next one, please. Our holistic approach, and that's the other thing that Hannah mentioned, is if we start looking the work that we need to be doing with a comprehensive approach, not just dividing different areas. In our case, it's been so powerful, and the results are, I can show you by, not with a lot of statistics, but I would like to talk to is about the stories of the people who are behind. Like share with you like the stories of the women who come to our events, and they tell you why they're happy, why organizations are taking the time to listen to them also, and how we can connect nature solutions and health solutions and sustainable livelihood. So these are the three pillars of the work that we do and how we involve as many people as possible. Next one, please. And in nature conservation, we've been doing environmental education workshops, restoration and conservation education, and we are also providing a lot of training with green jobs where the women can actually make a living, and which we think is one of the key aspects of a successful project, is to generate that income that it stays in the local communities and they can invest it, and also protecting habitats. We've seen that we need to have specific solutions for protect or conserve a habitat. So we've been very, very fast in collecting the funds that are necessary to protect, say, an area that needed, or just going and solve whatever the problem is and work with the communities to act quickly. Next one, please. In family planning is one of my favorite area to work, because this has been the best way how we can communicate with people and women, and at the same time getting health clinics that helps them to understand more about their body. And it's very common to see girls from 11 years old already pregnant at very young ages, having babies, and most of the time is they don't have opportunities to have access to family planning, and they're thirsty and desperate to have this resource and this right, but logistically is very difficult for them because they are in remote areas. So this is one of the main activities that we do, and it's been extremely successful with the voluntary access to family planning. Next one, please. In sustainable livelihoods, how we work is talking to them and see what skill they would like to learn. And they are so multifaceted, they're interested in several things. And it's just for us so rewarding to bring opportunities to them to develop their skills and really to find out their inner power and their potential. And these are workshops that never happened before, and they feel part of a community and part of something bigger. And it's very encouraging for them. Next one, please. Since we started, since the pandemic, we provided over 600 family planning methods, procedures that includes 360 contraceptives and implants. And also we are seeing that men are coming with the interest to undertake vasectomy, and they ask us to help them, which is rather nice. And we are actually doing it now. And we feel like the taboo that was before is disappearing. And the more we do it, the easier it gets, and the more communities are coming to us for help. Next one, please. This is a quote from one of the ladies that we had last week, Astrid. She's a 19-year-old girl, and she already has 2 children. So in her case, she feels happy to take the family planning because now she would like to study and she would like to continue with her education. And then I think it's very nice that I'm able to share her message with you in this space, that if it wasn't for this opportunity, I don't think no one will know about her and her life. And the same as Andres, we have so many thousands of stories of women who are happy and empowered, and they're exercising the right of choose when and how many kids to have. Thank you. Next one, please. So working along the nearly 2 decades, one of the really nice stories that I would like to share with people is the recovery of one of the species. In this time where a lot of bad news and is demoralizing, I would like to give you a little message of hope. And we work really hard for the conservation of the yellow-eared parrot in Colombia. And I'm very proud to have worked with, along with several people in the organization with ProAves, our partner, to fight for the recovery of this species, which now is being downlisted from critical endangered to vulnerable by the IUCN. So this shows that when communities and people who care about conservation come together and work together, real change can happen. And the beauty is that nature thrives with a little bit of a space if we care for. So thank you. Next one, please. And what we tell people is, after we share our story on why it's so important to protect the species, the endangered species, and fight for the rights of women and also the rights of nature, is, well, let's continue, and how they can help is let's continue to talk about family planning and conservation work and connecting those dots, because not many organizations are in a position when they can start openly and freely talking about these complicated issues. Listen and support women from the global south. I think if we listen more to what the women are saying, in our cases, we constantly listen to them, and they just thirsty for more opportunities, more access, and more education, and also get involved. I think that what is happening right now with this event is wonderful, and is speaking louder and louder, and be the voice of the women who are in the Amazon or are in the Choco region who don't have internet or don't have access to commodities. But when they meet with us, they let us know how important it is. So just listen to them and continue the great work. Thank you. Next one. On behalf of the team, on behalf of all the women from Colombia and Nepal, we would like to thank you. And it's an honor to share our message with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sara. That was fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to kind of diving into questions. I have a lot. I think we'll just start out by looking at the chat and seeing, I guess there's a couple of questions that have just recently come through. The first is thanking you for the fascinating presentation and also asking what the primary causes of deforestation are in Colombia. She's wondering if it's subsistence farming, commercial agriculture, or something else.
Yeah, the major driving force is cattle ranch, is on agriculture, conversion of land, and also the impact of expansion of some illegal cropping and also mining. So those sectors are big and creating some impact, obviously. But I would say that that's the major driving force. And Colombia just coming from decades of suffering and war. And for the last 10, 15 years, it's been a peace happening in Colombia, which is wonderful. And at the same time, now there is more pressure on the natural resources because it's a new country with a lot of areas that are intact. And of course, there is the potential for development. And I think it's very important that Colombia and the people in Colombia look for sustainable development. So that we care and leave some areas untouched, what is so important for biodiversity, and hopefully doing agriculture and sustainable practices more, having that into consideration is really important. And working with the communities when they know that some practices are very detrimental for their health and their kids. So that's also very important because they can be the ones to ask whoever company or coming to please have good practices that are not going to affect them.
Yeah, and I think the kind of issue of, you know, people interacting with their environment in various ways that cause environmental degradation, when looked at on more of a global sort of economic scale, becomes kind of complicated, right? Because deforestation occurs at the expense of natural systems that are local, but ultimately deforestation, you know, kind of fuels the production of commodities that are consumed elsewhere, and so on. So there's a question in the chat that's asking how the global north, or people, you know, industrialized countries, so to speak, could, like, is there a role for these countries to play in helping to offset deforestation that occurs in these tropical biodiverse regions?
That's a very good question. I think we are all interconnected in one way or another. And I think what happens here in the north affects the south and vice versa. When we look at the migratory birds, for instance, the migratory, we say that they live in Latin America and they migrate to you. but and then the opposite, you will say. But what we're seeing is they escape for the winter and they spend a little bit more of time there. But that's an example that we both need to look for a sustainable living, because if they also don't have the forest in here or protected areas in here, when migratory birds go down to the south, they're also going to suffer an impact because of the pressure. So I think both we could look for ways to decrease the need for so many resources, like small actions count, and using less water, using less power, going as much as you can with the environmental perception, and that you really can actually make an impact. Even if you think it's small, but everything counts when we do it collectively. So if we could address that some ways or forms of living in the developed countries are affecting, but also in other countries. So I think changing this perception, it helps a lot. And even talking about it more of, and even having like the subject of having kids, I know it's hard to say, I speak about that sometimes in the US, right? And it's complicated down in Colombia, but the more we do it and I think we will be making changes, because it's nothing like when I started 17 years ago, when I started talking about family planning and we had to do it hidden, and some of the ladies were beating up really badly because they were found out that they were coming to a talk where we're addressing conservation issues, but also we're talking about women's issues. So the more we do it, I think the better.
Yeah, thank you. And I think certainly from an individual standpoint, it's very important for people to be consciously consuming. So really recognizing and taking into account, whether or not a product is sustainably produced to the extent possible. And of course, certifications don't entirely solve the problem and still cause a lot of obfuscation, but that's something that, we should be doing on a really large scale as well, I think. I think, interestingly, you just brought up the point of family planning and the sort of cultural barriers that did exist or that may still exist in increasing the uptake of family planning. And I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on that. Like what barriers have you seen or experienced in the communities in which you work? Are they primarily Indigenous or Spanish speaking? And yeah, if you could just kind of talk through that a little bit. I'm just interested to know, what challenges you've seen with the implementation of family planning on a larger scale.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge is access to the methods and having an institution that is recognized and knows how to do the whole process of family planning, like going and doing the checkups and all that component. So we're actually partnering with an amazing organization. It's called Pro Familia in Colombia. They are the authority on this, and they have a very good team of doctors and nurses. So when we team up with them, we actually are helping the women because we are bringing the team to the nearest locality where they can be served. These women sometimes or many times don't have the time, or logistically is important because transportation from the mountains to the nearest town is very complicated. If you have to do it 3 or 4 times that it takes for a woman to actually go through the process until she gets an implant. So by making it really simple, what we do is with 1 appointment or maybe two to fill clinics, we get everything done. So it saves so much time, and we are paying for everything, for the implants, for the logistics. When also women decide to have 2 ligation, which is happening right now, and more often, I've never seen it before, they are actually asking us for help. So that is a procedure that takes a lot of more time and is more demanding on the woman. But also we are helping them. So the logistics is complicated, I would say, and because it's very remote. And the other obstacle, I would say, is that the perception that we think that women don't need it or don't want it, or what is going to happen if we talk about it. We are no focus of thinking anymore about it. We're just going, and whoever, if it's 1 woman, 10 women, 70 women, it doesn't really, this is not super important for us. The fact is that we are going even if it's 1 woman. It hasn't been the case, and we always end up with more women than we expected. But listen to them, because what they're saying to us is, please, yes, great help, bring more. Because this woman knows more women, and in the next workshop, all their friends are coming. So this is really, is the opposite, in my opinion, is the women are really interested. And we are the one that we have more work to do because we have the resources and the possibilities to help them.
Yeah, amazing. It just really speaks to how important and impactful the work you're doing is. And also just really heartening to know that, more than anything else, access is like the fundamental driver of family planning uptake, and that there are unmet needs for family planning and contraception, even amidst like conservative sort of rural communities that might otherwise be thought of as like conservative or sort of subject to pervasive religious ideology or whatever else. So that's amazing. Thank you. I'm so happy to learn about the work you're doing in that space. And it looks like Dr. Joan Castro just joined us. Hi, Joan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, well, thanks for logging on. We were just kind of in the middle of the Q&A period, but maybe you could take a couple minutes just to discuss the work that you're doing. I can give a brief introduction to the audience in terms of your bio. And then, yeah, if you just want to speak a little bit about your work, that'd be great.
Thank you. And apologies for being late. My internet was not working well this morning.
No worries. Yeah, we know things happen.
Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this event that you're having on Capitol Hill Days. And it's my pleasure to share with you what our experiences are in terms of integrating the population health and environment approach into climate change initiatives. And I would speak particularly on the experiences in the Philippines that we've had over the past decades. Yeah, and just to give you a context, more than 7,100 islands, and apart from includes, next slide please, that includes climate change issues. We have a poverty rate of actually are in poverty, and we work particularly with fisher folks, and fisher folks are the ones that are the sector that's the most impoverished of all the basic sectors, including women and farmers.
Joan,
we are resource dependent, and as I've mentioned.
Joan, sorry to interrupt. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you clearly, so we're thinking maybe it might be helpful if you could turn off your video just so that audio is a little clearer, please.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
I hope that helps. So
yeah.
as I'm saying, we're in resource dependent areas. About 80%, 60 to 80% of our protein comes from fish. There is that dependence actually also causing loss of biodiversity. And so all of these threats, including climate change, these stresses are affecting the lives and the livelihoods of the people in these communities. Next slide, please. Just probably to give you, next slide, please. I'll give you a little description of what the PHE approach is all about. It is an approach, it's a development approach that actually has particular emphasis on population health and environment sectors. But the underlying philosophy is fundamentally one of an integration. It also accommodates other sectors such as agriculture, education, clean energy. And what's beautiful with the integrated approach is that there's cross-sectoral collaboration and coordination, and experience from over 2 decades of working in PHE shows results in terms of creating synergy and value-added results compared to sectoral programs through simultaneous delivery of conservation, health, and family planning and reproductive health services and community involvement. So it's a very basic community initiative that empowers communities, including women, to be able to implement and address their needs at the community level. For over 2 decades, as I've mentioned, we started in 2000 when we started the pioneering initiative called Integrated Population and Coastal Resource Management Initiatives, whose lessons learned were actually replicated in not only in the Philippines, but also in select Africa countries in Africa, in East Africa. And the lessons that we've learned, which were documented by an external evaluations, that it addresses multiple issues, saving time and improving access of the communities to food, water, sanitation, health, family planning and reproductive health services and education, and building local capacity to manage their own resources. And it has also allowed involvement of greater number of men to family planning efforts and more women and adolescents to conservation efforts. So the benefits have reached the individual and household levels. Even conservation integrated approach is all about, so they bring with them messages as they do their conservation initiatives. It also builds resilience. Communities with functioning and intact ecosystems are more resilient to environmental shocks and disasters. And healthier people are also known to be resilient as well. Furthermore, it strengthens local governance by engaging local officials and providing space for dialogue and collaborative planning and coordination across the sectors. In the environment sectors, they've actually found that the WWF found that in 50 PHE programs implemented worldwide, these programs not only led to increase in family planning use in underserved areas, but it also increased goodwill with the community and improved the effectiveness of their conservation projects. Similarly, in sectors like health, next slide, please. The slide is showing what we have right now, shows the framework of WHO, which looks at, it illustrates the large scale and global environment hazards to human health. What this slide actually means is that the foundation of the health of people relies on the continued stability and functioning of the biosphere of the life-supporting ecosystems. So PHE is noted to be relevant in any stress that will affect the ecosystems will have huge and large impact on the health of the people. Next slide, please. This is another framework that we've used in the Philippines and this particularly what we prepared and developed as when we did a scoping study and looking at PHE approach. Where do we link climate change, or what are the opportunities where we could implement PHE approach to make people more resilient and ecosystems more resilient? What we found in the study, and I want just to focus on the middle part, is that with climate change, women are already experiencing poor health and sexual and reproductive health services. There's gender inequities, plus increased sea level and extreme weather patterns. All of these are affecting the women's life and livelihood even more. So climate change highlights the women at the center, the burden of the women at the center. And this is affecting their community participation, the stability of their livelihood, and the need for sexual and reproductive health services. And of course, it also affects the integrity of the ecosystems, being not able to be part of this. And all of this makes them more vulnerable, not only them as individuals, women and fisher folks, but their household as well, because it affects their aspiration for a better future for their children. So the opportunity to be able to implement the PHE approach is providing them, supporting them to have stable livelihoods, improve access to health and sexual and reproductive health services, and making them involved in conservation management. These all lead to climate change resiliency. Next slide, please. The results of the scoping study that we did in one particular marine biodiversity area in the Philippines found that to women and fisher folks that climate change is a reality. they all agree that climate change is happening. There is warming temperature. They don't have a word for it, but they are experiencing it. One woman actually described the fact that they had to move houses 5 times in the past 10 years because of rising water levels. They are concerned about climate change. And they know that it cannot be stopped by just them. And most are affected, that they know will be affected, will be the next generations. And they also know that families with more family members, large families, those who have low and unstable income, and women and children are the most vulnerable. Next slide, please. They know that, they believe that providing health, sexual and reproductive health services, and stable livelihoods, and helping them to manage their resources will actually contribute to significantly building climate change resilience, and for them to address other issues that exacerbate the poverty and the climate change impacts in the community. So they recognize that every little thing that they can do at their community level, at the household level, will actually be able to help in making themselves more resilient to these impacts of climate change. Next slide. Next slide, please. So, as a response to the challenge that we did on climate change, we implemented measures, collective and integrated measures that would provide multi-sectoral services as part of the equity-focused programs and to build climate change resiliency. So a package of services that has been implemented included women managed areas, which is non-traditional, women who were part of wardens to protect their conservation, providing women livelihood initiatives, and providing access or improving access to sexual and reproductive health services, were the package of services that were deemed essential for women and communities and households, particularly in these remote communities, to be more resilient to climate change. These initiatives we were able to also implement in other parts of the Philippines, and the communities, the local governments have actually also embraced this package of PHE services, recognizing the fact that climate change is a problem and an issue, and it will make communities more vulnerable if they are not addressed now. Thank you. I'll stop there and probably will take more questions and share more stories. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Joan. I'm really happy you were able to join this session and to talk about, the really, really amazing work that's being done by both organizations, but also the situation that's occurring right now in the Philippines with regards to climate change and the need to increase access to resources, especially amongst marginalized populations.